You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. May good luck go with you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Well, some days you're the statue, other days you're the pigeon.
Wow, really starting off profound here for our 100th episode. How about that?
Yeah, well, our 100th episode is the highlight of my day right here. It's not only the 100th episode, but we're now a toddler, right?
Yeah, we're 2 years old.
That's official at 2 years old, you're a toddler.
I think there's something about like the terrible twos and teething and things like that. And, I guess as a show, we're still in the teething stages as we're constantly figuring things out. But yeah, 2 years old, I guess, as of the time people are listening to this. And then, 100 episodes in. So we're averaging 50 episodes a year, which is pretty crazy, considering that this is even our full-time job, right? This is something we do on the side.
Right, so strap in, folks. It's going to be a fun next 100 episodes. Jeff, I wanted to do something. I haven't done this before, but I received a LinkedIn message from one of our listeners, Henrik Lingi. I'm probably butchering the last name, out of Copenhagen, Denmark. I'm just going to read it. So thanks for the podcast. Great stuff and inspirational style. A greeting and thank you from Denmark. And that made my day, just knowing there's people out there listening from all over the world. And, the word inspirational, that made me feel really good.
Well, there's nothing, there's always something to be said about identity management and the inspiring shows that people want to listen to. And I like to count ourselves as one of the top identity and access management focused podcasts in the world. How about that?
Yeah, well, we're definitely one of the few.
Yeah. We've had a great year, just from, I guess, let's pull back maybe the curtain a little bit and kind of break down the fourth wall from a podcast perspective, right? We've had a lot of great guests, and, my hat's off to you, Jim, because you handle most of the outreach for the show and making sure we get great guests lined up. But we've had a lot of big names come on, and we have a lot more big names coming on in the future, and some folks who've been with us, multiple times, which is great. And, lots of growth. I mean, we're up like 200% just in the last year alone. And this is all despite, really, we don't advertise, really. It's mostly word of mouth. It's mostly LinkedIn, a little bit of Twitter here and there where people are listening. But it's fantastic to kind of see people still discovering the show. And hopefully they're discovering the more recent ones when we have a better idea of what we're doing. But yeah, I mean, the content is timeless. I feel like it's, certainly a time capsule. You can kind of go back and listen to some of our first episodes and what was kind of the topic du jour of the time, and then see how it's kind of evolved into, a lot of zero trust recently and getting into passwordless. And it's just kind of a microcosm of how the industry has kind of, grown alongside of it and how our conversations have adjusted to reflect that.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, we're trying to attract guests who, have expertise in that area, people who are, researching or, fighting the ground wars or developing the strategies to fight things like ransomware, to build out frameworks and ways of thinking like zero trust, and building the technology that all this is going to run on, IAM platforms and, new technology like passwordless technology. Yeah,
and you're talking about that message too from Henrik, being from Denmark. I'd love to go to Denmark. I've never been. I'd love to visit that whole area of the world. It's one of the areas of the world I really haven't explored. I think the furthest or closest I would have probably been a brief stop in London, maybe Frankfurt Airport, and then Paris, for a couple of weeks. But I'd love to make it out there. I think that's one of the things that you and I have kind of talked about is, taking the show on the road, so to speak, maybe doing things at conferences and things like that. Obviously, COVID impacted that quite a bit for the last year. And I think, we're still kind of figuring out what does that look like in the future. But I think that's something that we could certainly, see where, hey, let's record something, let's get folks together at a common location and, just chat IAM or whatever, with folks out there.
Well, we've been road warriors for quite a number of years. And, one of the cool things was we've been able to kind of work from home. But what was always nice was being able to hit the road for, 1-2 weeks a month, and have that nice balance. And then with the pandemic, it really kind of all went away. And then we saw the whole world working from home. So it's been a fun ride. Speaking of the ride, I think, when we introduce our guest for today, we'll get into kind of that ride we've been on together.
Yeah, for sure. And, we're going to get to him in a minute, but I do want to give a shout out and a thanks to, everyone who's listened. We have people from 78 different countries who listen to this podcast, for better or for worse. So, having that world viewpoint and having those listeners all around and providing feedback is certainly appreciated. And we want to thank you all for that. And, as far as for us, right, we continue to try to do this in a zero commercial format, right? There's no ads. We don't talk about even really where we work or what we do. This is more of a conversation around, I am amongst friends, and we'll try to continue to keep it that safe place, free from, marketing and spin zones and vendor promotions and things like that. And let's get into specific topics and just have a frank and open discussion around it. What do you see next for the show, Jim, over the next year or so? You talked about another 100 episodes. I don't know if we'll get 100 of them next year. Maybe we shoot for 45 or 50, but I guess what are some of the things that you're looking forward to?
Well, I think that, I think we should shoot for 50. I think, the idea has been, and one of the things I think has been reliable about the show is that we publish a new episode every single Monday. So if you're on your podcast app, or if you subscribe and automatically download, it's Monday at noon Eastern U.S. Standard. So I think that's one thing we should strive to keep up. I know one thing that's going to improve about the show is my microphone. I'm going to get a better microphone. I think one thing that I've probably pointed this out a few times on past shows, but the quality of the podcast has improved exponentially in terms of the audio quality, and that's all you, Jeff. So you gave me credit on doing kind of the booking and getting our calendar lined up and reaching out and getting us guests, but you get all the credit when it comes to producing the show and making sure that our quality is at that next level. So hat tip to you. And then in terms of the content, I think it's this is all about bringing interesting guests, having real conversations, asking questions that, our listeners hopefully have on their mind. And then, I think one thing we may try in the next 50 to 100 episodes is, trying to do some more live audience feedback. We tried it one time. I think, we're going to have to grow into it, right? We've been doing this record ahead of time format for so long that we weren't quite mature and into it. But at some point, we've gotten feedback that our listeners want to see us do like a live stream and maybe participate in real time, ask live questions. So I could see us at least dipping our toe in the water. If you're listening to the show right now and that's something that interests you, reach out to Jeff and/or I on LinkedIn and let us know.
Yeah, it's definitely something that has been on the list, and I'm protective of the quality, right? And I feel like if we can't do it in a way that makes sense and that meets a certain quality threshold, I'm hesitant to do it, but I do want to do it. Let's put it that way, right? So I think we need to work through process and technology and making sure that it's inclusive enough where we have enough people. And to be frank, right, I don't want to do a live show and there's like 2 people. that might be not great for the ego either. But we'll see how it works out. I think it's something that, like you said, we want to try and let's figure out how to make it happen. I think. Also looking forward here, right, as this show was born underneath the banner of Identropy, which was the company that Jim and I worked for several years. Jim much longer than I did, but for 5 years each. We've now moved over to Protiviti. And, I think there will probably be, some changes. I'm sure we'll have new logo and new things around, the show itself, but the content should still remain the same. Again, that vendor neutral, safe place. Let's just talk IAM and, treat it as that format as we like it to be. So what I thought would be interesting for today, and really this is your idea, Jim, and it was a great one. I think we've been planning on this for a long time, since like episode 40 maybe. So maybe what we do is we take our identity DeLorean and we go back in time and talk about the Identropy story, because I think it's a fascinating one that talks about the building of a identity company, the maturation of it, and then it getting acquired, right, by a larger company, and kind of the life cycle of how that worked out. And to help us with that conversation, we are both very excited and happy to have Victor Barris. He was the co-founder of Identropy, and now he's a managing director with Protiviti, driving the strategic partner ecosystem for digital identity. Welcome to the show, Victor.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jim. It's a real pleasure to be here on episode 100. Certainly feel very privileged and honored to be here. And I just want to point out something quickly, which was, I was that little kid in the back jumping up, raising his hand for the last 99 episodes because I've been eager to be on. But hey, 100, awesome, congratulations, great milestone, and certainly big time kudos. You guys have officially become celebrities, so congratulations to you both, man.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I think obviously without your support, this probably wouldn't have happened, or at least not to the level that it happened so far. So you have a lot of impact behind the scenes that people may not be aware of. But, as a listener, I'm sure you know that the first question that we're going to get into is really talking about your identity origin story before we get into Identropy itself. But how did you get into identity and access management? Is it something that you chose, or did you choose it?
Oh, it definitely chose me. It definitely chose me. I had, prior to transitioning into IAM, deep experience in cyber. I was fortunate to be a part of a small team when I was consulting for IBM. Just 4 of us, in fact. We were brought in to, I know this is kind of where I'm really dating myself, brought in to build out firewalls on AIX machines with compiling IP chains, right? So there were a number of IBM customers that wanted to send emails between Yahoo and AOL, and so we built these gateways basically and created, using IP chains, filtering. And then we ended up managing these customers. So that became later on part of their managed services offering, and then obviously, the rest is history. But that was where my experience really, and I ended up consulting quite a bit. And fast forward, I ended up running a security practice for a mid-sized consulting firm in the New York metro area. And the identity transition came from a project I was involved in where they had a huge, massive overhead with password resets. And we're like, how are we going to address this problem? And we, at the time, were talking to a boutique identity firm by the name of Corion, and we ended up bringing Corion in, and the rest was history. Found myself deeply involved in that project, multiple phases, and that's where I crossed paths with some of the people that are with us today. Some of the early stage team members. And that was my entry into identity.
Yeah, no, what's so crazy about that is like we have CEOs, founders, CTOs on the show almost every week, and whenever we get into this IAM origin story, it's so common that folks start out like, yeah, my responsibility was writing scripts for the FTP server or something like that, right? Everybody starts kind of at that bottom stage, and that, to me, it's like that's where you really learn the technology, is when you have to have some point at which you're in the guts, right? Nobody comes out of college and moves into becoming like, I was the senior architect at IBM or something like that, right? You have to kind of start by doing something that really either throws you into the technology or, you're starting kind of at the bottom. So I think that's very cool, and that resonates with me because that's what we hear all the time. And usually when we're talking to folks, and Jeff has this theory that it's like 99% of the folks that we talk to are IAM chose them. Almost everybody who's been in this space for over 10, 15 years or greater, IAM chose them. So Vic, I mean, we know, we're going to talk a lot about Identropy today. 2006 was when the company was started by you and Ash. Can you talk to us a little bit about those early days? What was it like, starting a company? Did you go through the normal stuff of like, how are we going to make payroll this week? Those kind of challenges?
Well, before I go into that, I want to correct you on one thing, Jim. That was not the ground floor. Being involved in a pretty complex password reset project. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, that was it. That was the entry point. But no, you're absolutely right. The grunt work and paying the dues and things like that were a part of it. But yeah, appreciate that. So, moving to your question, around 2006 and crossing paths with Ash. Coincidentally, Ash, when I first met him, it was at the project that I was referencing, and we needed someone with expertise around collapsing directories and really establishing that central authentication store, etc. And it was the gentleman I was working with, and the gentleman I was working with was supposed to be at a meeting with the CISO at the time. And of course, he calls me up 10 minutes before the meeting, telling me he wasn't showing up, but that he had someone waiting at the front desk by the name of Ash, that I should bring him into the meeting. So that's how Ash and I met. And it was very clear, sharing a side-by-side sort of cubicles for the first couple of years at this customer, that we had some common sort of interests. And our drive was certainly pretty clear, and the fact that we both were pretty ambitious, we still are, but there was certainly a very clear motivation from both of us that we wanted to build something. And through that experience, we transitioned into leaving the consulting firm we were with, and started with what was back then, I think it was 5 people. And that was 2006, 2007. I will say that Ash did take the first leap of faith, and he was certainly number one. I stayed along on the project to work through the transition, and then we had a couple of folks join us, and Mike Tracta and Chris Heideck and Jeff Chang a little later. But those were that was the initial sort of ninja team, if you may.
It's a fascinating, story to hear about someone taking the leap of faith, right, to start something new. I think it's something that a lot of people probably dream about at their desk job. It's like, boy, if I was in charge, I'd do it a different way, or I'd do it this way, or why isn't it being done this way, right? These sorts of things. And my hat's off to anybody who has that entrepreneurial spirit and is willing to take that leap of faith to move forward and try something different. I think one of the things that, at least from my perspective, that attracted me, because I was actually a customer of Identropy when I first started to meet some of the folks there, and a lot of us through Corian work that was being done and so forth with people like Jamie and Wayne and Chad and so forth. But one of the things that I always thought was interesting was, I came from the corporate side. I didn't really like vendors. They were generally pretty skeezy and, always trying to sell me something. So I wasn't too interested in that. But I went to a customer, dinner in Las Vegas for some Corian conference I was there at. And I got to meet you, and I met Ash, and I met Jeff Chang. I was like, you guys are a lot of fun, right? I'm like, this was kind of like a good crew, a good team. And, it just felt like the culture was totally different than what I was used to in some of the working, some of the places I had worked at. And I remember sitting at that dinner table, talking Jeff Chang's ear off about all my technology nerd things that I would do, and things like that. I guess when you're starting up an organization, and as it matured and evolved over the years, the corporate culture is something that definitely attracted me to it. And I think we've heard that also from customers as well, that really kind of appreciated our approach to getting it done and kind of what was built there. How did you come up with that strategy? What did the corporate culture mean to you and things like that?
I feel that building culture, it's at least in my experience, it's not necessarily following a playbook. It's more of a moment in time, right? There clearly for us, there was a goal. There was a goal in mind. And the culture was really, for us, I would say, maybe Ash may disagree with me, but it was partly accidental. But what we did foundationally was that we hired really, really well. And by way of us hiring really well, particularly those first couple of years, there was this really powerful energy, chemistry, balance between that core team that really carried us into that place of knowing when we would look, side to side, perhaps at times not knowing where the next paycheck was going to come from, and to believe in one another, right? The leap of faith, Jim, as you said earlier, that we decided to take with one another, unspoken, that power, that chemistry, that energy, and that culture that we built from there. Just again, it was one of those experiences where, as we added more and more people, the power, the force multiplier, if you may. And one of the things that I always go back and remember, we were probably, before the word inclusive became more widely used as it is today, we were pioneers of that. We had probably the most eclectic group of people that you could, we did have the cool dude who would walk into a meeting with the mohawk, right? And he was the ninja. And, we had the guy who would, stand up and say, I'm going to make cows moo, right? So these things actually happened, right? So, but we gave people the platform. We gave them the autonomy. We gave them the confidence. And that over time just created that sort of foundation, right? That chemistry, that balance of all of us believing, as we went from 6 people to 12 to 20, 30 plus. And then over time, we were like, we need to figure out a way. How do we sort of document this? How do we, formalize this? Because it is unique. And then we actually came across company Zappos and Tony Hsieh. And, we all became disciples, of course. But that was probably the closest thing that, in our experience, building what we built, and the references there, the common themes between what Tony Hsieh built with Zappos and the emphasis around culture that I was able to sort of relate to. But powerful. And I said earlier, it's almost like, a place in time.
Oh, you know what? There's so many people that I want to talk about from Identropy. I'm going to pick a few out because you mentioned Jeff Chang. I mean, I remember starting with the company, and I started in 2012. And he'd been with the company already like 4 or 5 years. But he was like such a younger guy at the time, right? Obviously we're all much younger back then. But I think he started with Identropy very early in his career, and he was doing consulting. Now you watch the guy, and for the last few years, you watch the guy and his ability to understand this space and also, lead a sales team is just unbelievable, man. Watching that guy mature. Another person I wanted to talk about, well, you brought up Mike Woodburn, one of the funnest people that I've ever worked with. And he and I did, the Forge Rock practice together. We did a lot of advisories together. And I think, like you were saying, right, he had like a crazy mohawk. I don't know if he still has the mohawk now, but he had a crazy mohawk and a huge beard. And, when we would go places together, he was the party guy, and I was the straight edge guy. Now, when Jeff and I go places together, Jeff is the straight edge guy, and I'm the party guy. And actually, one of our clients called us the I Am Mullet.
Shout out to Jody.
Yeah, shout out to Jody. Business in the front, party in the back. Jeff was business in the front, Jim was party in the back. And the thing is, I've just met so many great people. The third one I wanted to bring up was Frank Villavicencio. We had him on the show before. I mean, his mind operates in a different way. Heck, even when we had him on the show last time, I think he called passwords the herpes of IAM.
I heard that one.
Yeah, the herpes of IAM.
That's classic. There you go. That's the guy that made cows moo, right? So, very appropriate. Very appropriate. Yeah. And I would say just, and 2 points of references. Sorry to cut you off, Jim. That's what I do, right? But, but the Jeff Chang story is, and I wanted to take a moment because when I was at the customer I was referencing earlier, Jeff was actually interning there. He was going to Rutgers, interning there. And I remember Jeff working with me and racking IDS devices and working on Cisco PIX firewalls. And I'm like, here I am, shoulder to shoulder. Who would have ever thought, fast forward 14, 15 years later. But when you talk about the development, professional maturity, personal, professional maturity, seeing him have a family, grow his family, and so on and so forth. That is part of our journey. We've seen many folks, but that particular experience with Jeff is one of the more gratifying ones because, as you point out, seeing where he's at now and the maturity and the professional development is second to none, right? Quite impressive. And so good. And then, Frank V. I think Frank certainly had a heavy hand and bringing the culture that we had built and the foundation of that culture kind of to the next level, and he was our chief people officer, if you may, at one point, right? So fantastic, fantastic.
I think if you think about culture from a bean counter perspective, it just looks like overhead, right? But to me, I think so many people look at, they say, well, it's more expensive to go out and hire people than it is to retain them. I think having that strong culture and putting the importance on culture, makes sense even financially. But I think it really made people want to stay with the company. And where I was going with this is, right, in this COVID era, everybody's kind of working from home now. Identropy's always kind of been a work remote. We had a couple of small offices, but not a lot of people. I'd say at least half of the company worked from their home office, right? So you'd work with people in Identropy and, never go out to lunch with them, right? But once a year, we had this annual meeting. And it was, to me, it was like the one opportunity we'd go somewhere like Las Vegas and, we'd all spend a day doing business meetings, but we'd get to interact with each other and, get to match faces with names and things like that. Because I would say even though the technology was there, it wasn't great as far as like Zoom meetings and things like that. So a lot of times you wouldn't see people's faces. And then we would do this FedEx Day, the second half of those meetings. So to me, that was so important. I wonder kind of what was your perspective on that? Obviously, that cost you a lot of money, right? Those were dollars that instead of putting them in your own pocket, you were spending to have people stay in hotel rooms and eat lunch and etc.
Jim, you bring up such good points. We see what's happening today in the marketplace. How everyone is trying to manage through the, intense human capital constraints in our space, right? Our space being as niche as it is, people being poached all the time. And there was a guy, of course, you all remember because there's some personality, Luis Imelda, who said to me, Victor, people come to work here because they want to come work here. And those are the people we want, right? The people we want are people that want to come work for Identropy. And I think most of the hires that we made were people that really wanted to come work here. And to that point about the investments, to the point about measuring the cultural aspect of it and what that means, it's sometimes difficult, right, to put a price on it. But the benefits are tremendously important because, the folks, ultimately the folks that were committed to the cause, committed to the workforce, to the company, were here because they wanted to be here. And of course, we ended up establishing a long list of other things that certainly empowered people further and made them feel like they had a true work-life balance in spite of how many people were burning the candle at both ends. But to net it all out for you, I think that we created that environment here, and the investments we made around the culture, the investments we made specifically to your point as well around the all hands meetings. And yeah, of course, Ash and I would be sort of agonizing about the investment and what that meant to the profitability, right, of a relatively small company, but powerful. And that served truly as that sort of, we pulled over to the gas station, refueled our tanks, if you may, and then off for the next 12 months. And again, there was just no substitution whatsoever. Jim, you make the point of there were months, right, on out where you wouldn't see your co-worker, your colleague, the guy you were working shoulder to shoulder with. And because we were pretty virtual to begin with, and we managed through that quite well. But when we got together that one time of the year, it was special, absolutely positively. From the trips to Vegas, which there's a whole long list of stories, which may require a whole different podcast, to Clearwater, which was awesome. Even the event we had in Austin, Texas, at the Hilton at the airport. So, and we also had one here in New Jersey, which was not very memorable because it was probably the smallest conference room of all. But yeah, every one of them was quite special. And to your point around FedEx Day, I was somewhat conflicted with the idea because, it was Osh's baby, frankly. And, and I know it was socialized between the leadership team. I just looked at FedEx as a way to, get people together, decompress, right? Let's not worry about working sessions and this, that, and so forth. It's 3 days. We fly people in. We let them kind of let loose, get together, socialize. And then this FedEx thing came up, and I was like, oh, my goodness, 24 hours, grinding. And I'm like, everyone's got to do presentations. And it was crazy because so many fantastic ideas came out of it. And then later on, we got away from it, right? Because I think people were, frankly, fatigued over time. But the ideas that came out of it, the plugins, time machine, Jim, right? Which I don't want to go too deep into because of the amount of money we spent on time machine.
And that was my baby.
Yeah, that was your baby. That was your baby. Absolutely. And but a phenomenal idea, right? But the whole point here with the culture and nurturing that culture and bringing people together, and the fact that we were virtual through and through, and I think that was also one of those frankly valuable criterias people working for us at the time, and you start to see the trend, and more mid-sized sort of companies were doing more of the same, but it never impacted us, right? And as you guys know, you all were also recipients of us, with Chad Walcott, which is also another key asset that we brought in, proposed the idea of doing a 4-day work week. And of course, once again, Ash and I looked at each other like, huh? Right? And it was amazing because that summer, productivity, certainly was, and we see the improvement in productivity. And it was so good where we decided to keep it in place through the fall and permanently. The same thing with unlimited PTO. Another one of those, things you have a knee-jerk reaction, or rather an allergic reaction to. And my goodness, we looked at the numbers a year or two later, and we realized that people were taking less time off, in spite of the fact that we gave them unlimited PTO. But that's, the message there, Jim and Jeff, is really more about the trust you put in people, right? The autonomy and the belief everyone had in what we were doing. No one was looking to take advantage of these policies, right? And we saw it. We saw it firsthand.
Yeah, I think if I could just, the FedEx Day, for anyone listening, was about, you had one day to deliver something, kind of like FedEx overnights your packages, one day to deliver. It kind of, I don't think it was a named corporate culture value, but the willingness to try something, the willingness to potentially fail at something is the core of innovation, right? You can't say, oh, we're into innovation, but we expect everything to be a rousing success, right? That's not what innovation is. Innovation has a chance that it could fail, and oftentimes does fail. You learn a lot from those failures. But that was something like that time machine. It was, like you said, it was a great idea. It failed from a commercial perspective. We learned a lot from it. We learned, what not to do next time, things like that. But, and Time Machine, for those who might be interested, Time Machine was, basically we took the ForgeRock software and built a B2B user management portal on the OpenIDM software. And the idea was we didn't want to turn it into a software package that we sold, because we didn't want to be a software company, because of things that happened prior.
Wait. I'm sorry, Jim. Jeff, is Jim still trying to sell Time Machines?
I think he's trying to explain the position of, here's what the intent was.
The justification of all the money we wasted.
Sunk costs.
Sorry, Jim.
So you mentioned not wanting to become a software company, but I think there was some software that came out of Identropy at one point called Squid. And maybe it was even a FedEx project. I'm not exactly sure. This would have been before my time. But what was Squid, or Squid Lifecycle? And I guess for folks who are trying to draw the dots, when did it come along and when did it leave?
Yeah. So, when I think of Squid, I immediately think of highly complex business model. No, running two different companies in the same roof, right? Every time I share that story with an entrepreneur, it's like, it's a big no-no. But I'll tell you, Squid came from this vision idea of developing a lightweight cloud delivered IAM product, right? So, sort of contained in this box, right, with limited use cases, etc., and kind of what we saw with Identity Now when they were launched, and of course it's evolved quite a bit. And we believed in the vision, certainly influenced heavily and rightfully so by Ash because of his product background and his very strong analytical skills. We decided, hey, let's give this a go. And I was all about it. We went out in 2010, started, 2011. We closed the Series A. And of course, we did our rounds. We did our rounds from Menlo Park to Boston, Philadelphia, New York. And then we ended up syndicating with two funds, one out of Philadelphia, one out of New York. And that was in 2011. Right. And we took that ride, which is what it was. I was involved, but also focusing still on the consulting side. Ash was driving the product side. And that's when we, through that raise, of course, we did, some of the common mistakes people do when they raise money. We got the big office in New York. with more footprint than we ever needed, influenced by investors, but nonetheless, valuable lesson learned. And we really opened things up and brought in some really strong talent. Of course, from the product side, we needed people with experience, understanding the customer development process. On the marketing side, needless to say, we had to drive the positioning and messaging of the product, which we did, and we brought in some tremendous talent. People like Tom Neckel, people like Ranjit Vitwant. I think that was around the time Frank was already on board, but he played an important part. And then we expanded our Austin office. And that journey went, hard. And we, goodness gracious, fast forward to 2011, 2014, we were fortunate enough to go into a transaction with CA. And the validation, again, of the vision was certainly realized, right, by seeing something like that acquired. So it was a nice notch on our belt. We wasn't quite the outcome we were looking for, but it was good in respect to finding a really good home for a tremendously talented group of people at CA. We transitioned over to CA, and we were able to shore some money. And then at that point was when we really started to pivot and put the emphasis and focus in consulting. That was early 2015.
I think it makes me think of the importance of being nimble, being ready to take on an opportunity, and taking a risk, right? That's kind of the whole idea that we were talking about there with the FedEx Day, right? Being willing to take a chance of failing. And I wouldn't say that Squid Life Cycle failed. I think it was probably an idea that was ahead of its time, right? I think that most of the IEM products that were in the cloud at the time were focused on single sign-on. This was far ahead. Nowadays, people generally don't even want on-premise IAM systems, right? It's like all cloud, and some of the approach is different. It's not always SaaS, like Squid Lifecycle was SaaS. But, it was probably just that, having that early mover advantage can be a huge benefit sometimes, but if you're too early, it can be a hindrance.
Totally. I think I only laugh because, another 5 million would have certainly helped, right? But, heavy dilution of what we had. But absolutely ahead of its time, as we see now, some of the products in the marketplace. But tremendous team, tremendous experience. Again, it's you see the market how it shifts, and I think we were, to your point, Jim, just a little early.
Another opportunity that came along shortly after that sale to CA was to exponentially, or maybe not exponentially, but at least I think it probably doubled the size of the company by bringing in a lot of the teams, some folks that you've referenced earlier. I think, what they always say in baseball is better to be lucky than good, right? You can hit that number ground ball into a hole and win the game. You could rock a line drive, but if you hit it right at somebody, it doesn't do you any good. So maybe talk us through kind of like that whole experience and then how it led to how things are today, where we are in 2020 or 2021 now, but 2020 as of, where that went.
Yeah, Jim, I was hoping really, really hard that you wouldn't bring up any baseball metaphors, because that's all I'm going to talk about in baseball metaphors from this point moving forward. So thank you for rewiring my brain. Anyway, that was a crucial turning point. As I said before, after the Squid transaction in late 2014, it was time to pivot and refocus our energy on the consulting side. And difficult, stretch too, because consulting was also funding part of the product efforts, right? Naturally, right, when you have these two businesses under the same roof, right? And that pivot into the focus and concentration around consulting services challenged us in many ways and also opened up many doors. I was fortunate enough, as I said earlier, our early partnership with Corian. I've met some great people. One of those folks I've met, I'm still good friends with, is Kurt Johnson. And Kurt came to me and asked me for my thoughts about the possibility of transitioning in, a group of folks and folks that I've worked with very closely. And I'm like, this doesn't happen. I mean, bringing in this kind of talent first and foremost, and bringing in talent like this that has worked together. So, man, the timing of it was phenomenal. Corian was going through some transitions themselves, and it was a very natural. The opportunity was tremendous, but also a very natural transition. Now, to your point, it was like an acquisition because in total it was about 12 people. Initially it was around 8, and then we brought on a few others. But the talent pool was tremendous. And again, we were relatively small, probably in the 30s, mid-30s, high 30s. So bringing on that number of initially 8, then 10, 12, you're adding what? A fair amount of people. So it felt like you were bringing two companies together. So, there was a lot of friction, and it was a lot of sort of smoothing out the edges, and a lot of long hours, trying to get people with strong opinions to coexist. But the outcome was extremely powerful. I mean, people, and I apologize in advance if I'm forgetting some names, but people like Wayne Sissel, who came in and was the operational ninja. And Wayne, please, I'm not pigeonholing you as an operations guy, okay? But tremendous talent there, and finance, and we Salesforced everything and optimized it, and now the visibility, forward-looking reporting, projections, forecasting, that really helped elevate what we were doing as a company. Bring in, of course, Chad Walcott, who added tremendous experience running services for Corian globally. Bringing that asset over was a huge shot in the arm for us. That level of maturity, experience really helped. We formalized the structure of our teams. And then, shortly thereafter, given that we finally sort of transitioned from the product side, I had a very significant moment in time as well, where I met with Kevin Cunningham, co-CEO of CellPoint back then at RSA that year, 2015. And, it was basically, the bottom line was like, hey, I'm finally waiting for this moment. We have no more conflict because we had product, right? We want you guys onboarded as a partner. And Luis Imelda, who I referenced earlier, was mission critical in that partnership. And that was a big turning point for us. And as you know, we grew the CellPoint practice exponentially. We developed a tremendous team, tremendous practice. We were awarded Rookie of the Year, which was no small feat. And, an Admiral Delivery Partner consecutively for, 5 years in a row. So, yeah, good work there. And that was certainly a key moment in time for the company and its maturity. And last but not least, it was another person that we brought in around that time, which was, I think, a year later, that really helped manage the workforce, not just from an operations, but also from a strategic point of view. And Kristen Beenders, she was tremendous. It added another layer of maturity. You guys didn't have to come to Ash and I anymore. You had a professional that you can trust and you can speak to and would listen to you guys. So Kristen was tremendous in really helping us through managing the workforce, and just adding that another layer of professionalism that we certainly sorely needed.
I thought it was very interesting because that's around the time when I came on board with Identropy. It would have been towards the end of 2015, and I was able to enjoy the ride of 5 years, as Identropy. And I'll tell you flat out right now, best company I ever worked for. And it wasn't any one thing, but it was the variety of people and the high quality people. And, you know, you go to a job and you always find, you know, a few knuckleheads that you just don't get along with for whatever reason. I never had that issue at all. I think, you know, everyone was just a ton of fun to work with. You know, we GSD'd, or as it was, you know, commonly referred to as get stuff done, you know, and people were, you know, happy to be autonomous and work through things and collaborate when needed. And, you know, that I think that stretched all the way, you know, through the end of 2020. And, you know, I think most people remember 2020 as the year of the pandemic. I think of it as, you know, the final ride for Identropy. And I know we don't do commercials, so that's why we're really talking about Identropy Live, because the company doesn't exist anymore, right? As of the end of 2020, it got acquired by Protiviti, which is where we're all at now. I guess maybe, you know, let's talk about that final year, because I'm always curious from a life cycle perspective of an organization. You know, when did the discussions start? You know, when did you think about, you know, maybe, you know, selling and things like that? And I'm curious to see how this kind of all played out from your perspective.
Why are you doing this to me, man? This is
I'm
like,
your
wait, Jim, is he like that guy from ESPN? Remember Roy something? He would interview people and then eventually they'll start crying. What was the guy's name?
This was the scene from Jerry Maguire, right? Where the guy, Rod, I think it was, goes on the show and is like, "You're not going to make me cry. I'm not going to do it."
Well, that's the guy. That's the famous interviewer from ESPN, Roy something. Anyway, but so the ride, you know, I'll tell you, there's so many, and I've referenced a number of times here, kind of a place and time, you know, things falling together, taking a natural path, and for us, goodness gracious, you know, if you would have told me in early 2020 that, you know, even though we were doing great work and foundationally things were really starting to come together, then we get hit with the pandemic, right? But if you would have told me in March that, you know, we were going to grow 35+% and have a transaction in terms of selling the company, I would have asked you outright, you know, so what exactly is it that you're smoking out in Chicago, Jeff, right? So I'll say that it did happen in a very natural way. We crossed paths with someone, of course, you guys know Terry Jost. Ash and I both have a history with Terry. And I happened to go out to Dallas to meet with Terry and Ash, who lives out in Dallas. So, and this is like literally 3 days right before the lockdown. And the meeting was just, you know, casual meeting to hear more about the Protiviti story and how we can partner and do some things together, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, everything just sort of went quiet from that point forward. And then in roughly late summer, August, September, we reconnected. And there was certainly interest on the Protiviti side. Ash and I met with Terry, of course, not in person, but virtually again. We met head of Corp Dev. And it just felt like a very natural fit. I'll tell you why I say natural. I think because Terry's understanding of identity, Terry ran an identity company and sold it. I think it takes a unique set of circumstances of someone really appreciating the space, understanding the space. And then we looked at the Protiviti, Protiviti as an organization, Protiviti as, goodness, the breadth of coverage and size. And, you know, we're like, hey, this could be something that can really serve us well. The opportunity to scale something that we built foundationally. And Ash and I both knew that there wasn't much more upward mobility, career development for a lot of the folks that have been with us for quite some time. And this is also an opportunity to potentially realize that, right? Create that path for upward mobility and also opportunity to try their hand at different things. The number of business lines here and capabilities and Protiviti are infinite. And for us, really that opportunity to take what we built, the brand, the recognition in the industry, and now transitioning it here with a team already in place, which is great. We've had really good collaborative experience so far, and I think, to turn the dial and elevating that to be recognized globally, it's a very compelling journey, right? So we saw that, we kind of pieced it together, and in October we received an LOI, and it was a very, very aggressive and certainly tiring process for those 3 months. And as you guys are well aware, we closed in late December, and then here we are, badged right in January, and 6 months later. I mean, I would have never imagined, but it's been a great experience, frankly, and a positive one.
Yeah, I know. I always hoped Identropy would never sell, but I always knew it was possible. I feel fortunate to have been able to be on that ride for my 9 years, and now continuing on with Protiviti. But while we have you, Vic, I'd like to get your perspective. I mean, you've been in this industry for so long now. You're heading up the strategic partner ecosystem for digital identity. What do you see the future of this industry? What's next in your mind?
You're asking the wrong person. A good question, but no, I'll take a stab at it. I tell you, I mean, one of the things I see kind of coming from that world of the perimeter, right, and security, I see more and more identity moving to the edge, right? The consumption of all these platforms, there will be a time soon enough, not too far in the distant future, where there will be no on-prem and cloud. It'll be only cloud, right? So, but I think that at the edge, as we know it today, layer 3, there'll be a lot more layer 7, more applications. There will be absolutely the level of verification there. And, identity is going to continue to be at the core of things, right? From an enablement point of view, from an entitlement point of view, but entry into these points now, AWS, Google Cloud, right, Azure, and and I think it's going to play a huge role as the gatekeeper, if you may.
I think what is going to continue to happen is bad actors are going to continue to use cyber attacks against companies to steal, whether it's steal data or try to ransom companies. I really feel that there's going to be a major migration to non-phishable, strong authentication everywhere. I think it's just going to be the standard. Now, I really think the industry has to move that way, that level of security gets built in. But I think we're getting to, if we're not already at the apex, we're going to get to the apex where it's just you have to do something about it, because the cost of not addressing the issue, the potential risk of being in that situation, of having your company's operations shut down because of a cyber security event, is just going to be unacceptable, and companies will be willing to, take the dip, spend the money. The big concern that I have is that, everybody's starting to now take this seriously. You mentioned kind of the lack of, or the gap in, the need for talent versus the pool of talent. I think the pool of talent is going to have to grow. I think this industry is going to grow in terms of people getting into it. And that first question we ask you is going to be answered in a different way by the next generation. It's, how did you get into IAM? Did you choose it, or did it choose you? I think more and more people are going to say, I chose it, because is a great growing field, and there's a lot of money in it, and that's where I wanted it to be.
Wait, did you say Did you say money? We're not doing this for the money, Jim.
Yeah, of course not.
The podcast, maybe.
the podcast, maybe. But Jim, and once again, apologies for cutting you off, but I think that the point that I was highlighting about the edge, just filtering access at the edge is absolutely, as we continue to move forward, it's critical today, but you're going to have to now introduce some form of verification, some form of management of those identities at the edge level, right? So it's like it'll be a mandatory requirement and utility, and how that will evolve. It'll be interesting to see how that happens.
It's kind of like where MFA is today. It should be mandatory. Everyone should be using it. Is it out there yet? No, but that's where it's going, and it's some combination of passwordless and things like that as well. All right, so we've been rambling on here for a long time, and I certainly appreciate your time, Victor. With the way things have gone over the last year, I thought it would be interesting to kind of talk about, to close out this episode, learning what are some of the hardest parts about working virtually. I mean, this is something that I think us as a group have been doing it for a long time, because Identropy was a virtual company, so the change really wasn't so much for us. If anything, I'm spending more time at home than I am on the road, which was always kind of virtual as it was. But what's been the hardest part about working virtually for you? And Victor, we'll start with you, and then maybe what was the easiest?
The hardest part, I mean, my wife distracted me at least every other hour. No, I think... Oh, God, I hope she doesn't listen to this podcast.
Yeah, she's not a listener, I bet, but maybe.
I don't think she's our target audience, but you never know.
But I'll tell you, it's absolutely, something I referenced earlier, where we would use the all hands as a way to refuel our tanks. Well, man, meeting our team in Austin, going up to Lexington to meet the Northeastern New England team, the interaction face-to-face, sorely missed. And of course there are customers as well. And as I think, Jim, you said earlier, no matter how sophisticated these platforms have become to communicate with folks, there's just no substitution. That's been one of the most difficult things.
What about the easiest thing?
Yeah, I think the fact that we've been doing this for so long, it was, once again, I keep referencing things being natural. That was probably one of the more natural things for us. I remember people just scurrying, not being able to have the infrastructure to allow, a couple thousand people to VPN concurrently. I remember hearing stories of people kind of bringing the networks down and going crazy because they can provide, a couple thousand people access into their environments. We were set up. We knew the proper hygiene, if you may, behavior and motions of working remotely. It's kind of second nature to all of us. So it wasn't that big. It was quite easy.
I think for me, the hardest thing for working virtually is boundaries, and not for, at least for me, working all the time, trying to set boundaries around work. Mm-hmm. I find I do a lot of my best work at like midnight sometimes, as I'm working through a PowerPoint and a strategy and things like that, right? And kind of assessing. And I think that's been a challenge. And I know my wife has certainly said, okay, your phone's been dinging, for the last like 10 minutes straight with Teams messages, right? Or Slack or whatever it may be. And being able to turn off business hours, I think, is sometimes a challenge. But I do like to, I am trying to get better at it, setting around the boundaries. And, as far as the easiest thing is, I've been set up for this. I've certainly invested in my own setup to have strong network, right? I think of it as a utility in my house, right? There's power, there's water, and then there's internet, right? Those are the three things. As long as I have those three things, I'm good. So,
you need air conditioning too.
Well, knowing you, Jeff, the gadget freak you are, you probably easily overinvested.
Oh, without a doubt. There is absolutely no question whatsoever that I have spent more getting my office set up than probably needs to be. But this is where I spend 12, 14 hours a day sometimes, and I want it to be comfortable and to be rock solid. So I don't want to have issues, especially.
Let's get the violin out, Jim. This is it. I work really hard. You guys should know that. Okay.
Oh, I game hard too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, this is a lot of dual purpose things too. So don't get me wrong. Jim, what about yourself? What are some of the challenges that you've had working from home, and then what are some of the things that maybe made it easier for you as part of that transition?
I think the answer to both is that, the freedom that working from home allows you is a double-edged sword, right? You get to kind of make your schedule, work when you want, the hours that you want. You've got to get the work done, but it doesn't necessarily all need to take place between 8 and 5. But the other side of that, the other edge of that sword is that it takes a good amount of discipline. And even though I've been working from home for, probably 12, 13 years now, I still have to kind of, drive myself to not, turn on the TV and watch TV in the middle of the day and stuff like that. So I think those are, the biggest challenges. Then, the one thing that Victor said, I think jokingly, but have you guys heard the question before? What time do you have calls today? As if the only time you have to get work done is by being on calls. It's like, no, I have a call at, 9, I have a call at 11. That hour in between, I was planning on working on a PowerPoint deck or working on an Excel spreadsheet or doing, answering emails. But folks think that when you work from home sometimes, that the only time you're working is when you're on calls.
Yeah, just the scheduling situation here, since the transition, it's been quite interesting. Of course, transitioning from trying to not go to sleep at 1 a.m, right, which has happened to a lot of us, and adjusting that, rewiring yourselves, and then Protiviti as a global company as well. I mean, and I welcome it. I think it's awesome. Talking to the guys in the UK, talking to the guys in Asia Pac, certainly presents a little different twist, but it's not like it's happening every day. But I think it's my heart goes out to some of the folks that we deal with on a consistent basis that are out in the West Coast. We have 8 o'clock meetings and so on and so forth. But I know that Mark Giore is used to that, right? Coming over. But yeah, I think there's no start or kind of cutoff point. And I think to your point, Jim, managing your time and being disciplined are crucial in this day and age. And I think it's more and more the new norm.
That word discipline is definitely what strikes me as the most important thing, right? At the end of the day, you're responsible for the work. You have to be able to show the discipline. And, I hate to say it, but a lot of companies have basically put policies and procedures in place that try to address the 5% of the bad apples, and it affects more people. So whenever I see something, that is a little bit maybe draconian, I kind of have a little bit of a reaction against that. I feel like people, for the most part, will do the right thing, set up a policy that works for most people most of the time, and then treat the exceptions as the exceptions. And if you have a person or persons that are trying to take advantage of the system, maybe they're not the right fit for the organization, right? So rather than punishing 95% of the org, address the issue where it may be. So that's my soapbox when it comes to policy. So
no, that's all spot on, dude, because I think that's what the byproduct, and it didn't happen. I think it was a couple of isolated cases when we came up with, a 4-day work week. It became a 3-day work week for some. When we came up with unlimited PTO, it became ultra unlimited PTO for others. So yeah, you kind of weave out, some of the folks.
People always try to stretch it, but speaking of stretching, this show has definitely been one of our longest ones. But as a celebration of us turning 2 of our 100th episode, and really kind of be able to talk through the history of what it's like to start an identity company, the events that took place throughout, and obviously we're talking about Identropy, and then the end of one part of an identity company and the start, of another, and things like that. I think it's been very interesting to kind of hear from you, Victor, as we've kind of gone along this journey along the way with you. So before we wrap up, though, for this week, what I'd like to get is just some final thoughts, maybe, from yourself, Victor, of, anything that's out there that you want to throw out for the listening audience to take away from this conversation, words of wisdom, words of advice, maybe people who are, in a maybe similar situation where they're thinking about, how do they run their own kind of identity org or company, right? Because I think a lot of organizations, really, they do have an identity company within their organization, right? How should they maybe think about kind of approaching those sorts of things? Any kind of final thoughts for us, Victor?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is I've always felt at that moment in time when we had the core, it didn't matter what we did, whether it was spinning up a styrofoam manufacturing company, we were going to be really successful, to becoming the elite identity and access management consulting organization. Again, back to that core, back to the autonomy, back to the trust. And frankly, I said it earlier and I'll say it again, I don't think there's a particular playbook, and I think this is where Ash and I complemented each other quite well. And we were, labeled as the yin and yang, right? And I'm not saying you need two CEOs to make this happen, but, when you build a services organization, the most valuable assets are your people. And I think you need to give that the right level of attention and the right level of nurturing. That's my advice.
That's good stuff. What about you, Jim?
I was so afraid that we're going to forget to mention people during this episode, and I'm sure we did. But one person I wanted to mention was Fletcher Eddington, right? He's like the young Jeff Chang, kind of working his way from intern at Identropy. And I know he's a regular listener, so he actually might still be listening at this point. But I also wanted to thank him. He was our first guest on episode 2, called Identity at the Center, episode 2, Getting into the Sexy World of IAM. And just looking at some of those early episode names and thinking of how far we've come, episode 17 was called, episode 16, the IAM Garbage Plate. That's wonderful. That's good stuff right there.
And I know we've went really long here, but I need to, you guys asked me a whole bunch of questions. It wasn't fair, but but I need to ask you guys, do you guys remember the core values of Identropy?
Autonomy. I know that was one, I think.
Oh,
right?
That's good. Yeah. You know how many there are?
I think you said 4, so I'm going to say 4.
No! I didn't say 4. No.
Oh, I thought you said 4.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Jim, you want to take a stab? At least one or two?
GSD.
No, GSD was not a core value.
Innovation, customer centricity.
Yes.
That's all I got.
We got collaboration, drive, autonomy, innovation, and customer centricity. Well done.
That's not fair to quiz us on something that... Who cares anymore? Come on.
What?
This is table stakes, right? This is just what we do, right? Be a good human being to others. Be a good person, right? We don't have to codify this. Come on.
I know. We got a lot of slack for that. It's okay. Hey, we started with 12 core values and we ended up with 5, so that was a huge improvement.
It's kind of like the executive summary version of the core values.
There you go.
Whittle it down, make it understandable. All right. Well, Victor, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Jim, as always, here's to another 100 or more episodes as we continue this great experience of a podcast. And for those who have stuck with us, thank you so much for listening. The best thing that you can do to help us is to share it with a friend, right? Hit the subscribe button, whatever you need to do to kind of help us get the word out is always appreciated. So with that, thank you so much for listening. And we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. If you can connect with Victor on LinkedIn, I'll have his link in the show notes. And obviously you can connect with Jim and myself as well. We're always looking for feedback on the show. So thanks again for listening, and we'll go ahead and leave it there. We'll talk with everyone in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.